Dames en heren, namens de Raad van Bestuur wil ik u van harte welkom heten op deze inmiddels alweer 8e Grand Round. Die zoals u weet elke derde maandag van de maand wordt gehouden. En het is goed om nog even een paar namen te noemen dit keer, die daar altijd heel erg goed bij helpen. Dat is natuurlijk Jan-Jaap Schmiets en verder Yvette van der Locht, die er nou niet bij is, maar een groot deel van de organisatie voor de rekening neemt. En natuurlijk de medewerkers van POG Heijendaal, Maanlicht Media en natuurlijk onze eigen restauratieve dienst. Het is alweer de 8e keer. We hebben de laatste keer 4 externe en 4 interne sprekers gehad. Variërend van de wethouder van Economische Zaken van onze gemeente tot en met de voorzitter van de Nederlandse Zorgautoriteit. En natuurlijk eigen coryfeeën zoals Han van Krieken, Han Brunner en Gert Westert. En deze Grand Round, deze 8e keer, hebben we een internationale spreker. And that's why I will switch to English. We are very proud to announce the world famous innovator Paul Levy to be the presenter of this 8th Grand Round. Paul is the former CEO of Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center in Boston, with more or less the same size as our hospital, I think, Paul. Paul started in 2006 to write this very famous blog, Not Running a Hospital, which is visited more than 10,000 times, more or less, per day. And in this blog, Paul has taken public positions on topics such as transparency of clinical outcomes and safety issues. And Paul is a very active man. He gave TED Talks and published very recently a book, which is over there, and I just heard from Lucien that will be translated in Dutch next year, I think. And that's a book about that offers insights from sports, healthcare, business and government to help leaders to get better outcomes. In his talk, Paul will give us innovative examples from his own experience that can help us to get better, provable quality of care for our patients. Paul, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here with you. It's lovely to be back in Nijmegen. I've been asked to talk about the role of transparency in process improvement, and I will do that. But before I do that, I need to present to you a problem, a paradox, and see if you can help me think it through. The paradox is this. I hope you would agree with me that the people who choose to go into the field of medicine, particularly people who choose to be doctors, are among the most well-intentioned people in the world. After all, they devote their lives to alleviating human suffering caused by disease. That's a pretty spectacular thing, that people would choose to spend their lives taking care of us. I think we should be grateful for that. I hope you'll also agree with me that those people who choose to be doctors tend to be of above average intelligence. Any disagreements there? Okay. And also that they go through extensive training. Their regular academic training in secondary school, university, medical school, residency, and even after they become doctors, they participate in continuing medical education. So we have this group of people who are extremely well-intentioned, highly intelligent, very well-trained. And the paradox is this. How is it that that group of people, when working together in the hospitals around the world, whether here in the Netherlands or in the United States, collectively represent one of the largest public health hazards? And by that I mean they collectively kill thousands of patients per year. Patients who don't die because of their disease, but who die because of the treatment or lack of treatment they get in hospitals. Clearly, it's not a matter of those doctors not caring, because they're well-intentioned. Clearly, it's not a matter of skill or intelligence, because they're highly trained and very thoughtful people. So why is it that this happens, and what can we do about it? Well, this question was actually answered in a famous movie called It's a Mad, 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 Mad World. I don't know how many of you remember that movie. Do any of you remember that movie? Raise your hands if you remember that movie. Okay. This is a generational issue because the movie was in the 1960s and it was a comedy. It had some of the world's greatest comedians in it. And one of them was Ethel Merman. Do you remember Ethel Merman, the comedian? And at one point in the movie, Milton Berle comes up to her. Something bad has happened. And he says, it was a terrible thing, but these things happen. And Ethel Merman, playing Mrs. Marcus, gets very upset. And she says, now what kind of an attitude is that? These things happen. They only happen because this whole country is just full of people who, when these things happen, they just say, these things happen. And that's why they happen. We got to have control of what happens to us. And what I'd like to suggest to you, and I mean this with great affection and respect for doctors and nurses and people like that, is we have come to expect that in hospitals, people will be harmed. We believe, perhaps doctors believe this because they're scientists, they believe that there is a statistically irreducible amount of harm that has to occur in hospitals. It just happens. Now, I agree that there is a statistically irreducible amount of harm that has to occur in hospitals. I just don't think we're anywhere near that number. I think there's a great degree of harm that occurs in hospitals that doesn't have to, that's preventable. In the United States, I don't have the numbers for the Netherlands, in the United States, 100,000 people per year die preventably in American hospitals. 100,000 a year. Now, it's hard for people to imagine 100,000 as a number. As human beings, we usually can only visualize 10 to the third. We can visualize a meter, we can visualize a kilometer, we can visualize a millimeter, but we can't visualize 100,000 kilometers. Likewise, we can visualize a person and 1,000 people, but we can't visualize 100,000 people. So in the US, 100,000 people is equivalent to a 727 airliner crashing every day and killing everybody on board. That's what it means. Now, if that were to happen in the airline industry, after about 3 days, we would shut down all the airports, and we would say, what's wrong with the pilots, what's wrong with the airplanes, and so on. The equivalent number, and by the way, it is the equivalent number here in the Netherlands and elsewhere, occurs proportionally, occurs every day, but it's dispersed, it's spread out, and we don't do anything about it, or we don't do much about it. I want to today tell you some stories that I think illustrate what we can do about it and that have worked elsewhere, some of which are working very well here, and you should be proud of that. But I think there's a challenge here for the entire medical profession, and I think the solutions have to come from the medical profession. I don't think the solutions will come from the government telling us what to do or from the insurance companies telling us what to do. I think it has to come from within. As the Zen masters like to say, change must come from within. So, where does this all start and end? Well, in my life, everything starts and ends with football. And I know in this country that's an important sport. This is me and my 11-year-old girls with our championship team a number of years ago. These girls are now in college, so they've grown up. And what's the story here? Well, I believe that many of the problems the medical profession faces are problems of training and problems of pedagogy and culture. And that the cultural problems are reinforced by the manner in which medical education takes place, both in the schools and in the hospitals. There was a wonderful basketball coach named John Wooden at University of California who had an expression. He said, if you're trying to teach somebody something and it's not being taken in, they're not being able to absorb it, it's usually the problem of the teacher, not the student. And his expression was, you haven't taught until they've learned. I'd like you to think about that as I go through these examples. Because remember, when it comes to our doctors, we're dealing with highly committed, well-intentioned people, highly intelligent, and the like. But there's something going wrong in the training program. We're not teaching them some of the things they need to know but it's not their fault. It's the fault of the people who are conducting the training. So let's start with soccer, with football, as we call it. You're all sports fans here. If I were to say to you, what's the most important skill for a football player, what would you say? Collaborating. Most important physical skill. What do you think? Kicking? Huh? Running? Falling? You were not very, that's the wrong sport for you. Okay. I think the most important skill on a football field is being able to control the ball when it comes to you. Right? Because if the ball comes to your foot and bounces off, the other team will get the ball. And I don't think I have to explain to this audience that a football game is actually a very simple game. There's a ball, two teams, two goals. The object, get the ball into their goal more often than they get it into your goal. To do that, you have to control the ball. If you don't, they get it and they control it. Once you can control the ball, then you can decide, do I pass it? Do I shoot it? Do I dribble? What do I do with it? So one day I'm with the 11-year-old girls, and I'm explaining this to them. Girls, you know, the most important part of this game is controlling the ball when it comes to you. But what makes that possible is to think about the ball as it approaches you. If you wait, I don't know if we have any neurologists in the room, but you understand that if you wait until a ball is actually at your foot and try to send a signal from your head to your foot, it won't get there in time. By that point, the ball will have bounced off. So you need to think about it before you get the ball. And I explained that in simpler terms to the little girls. I said, okay, girls, you got this? Think about what you're going to do with the ball before it comes to you. Okay, coach, they said, no problem. So I throw out a bunch of balls. 3 seconds later, a ball comes rolling to a girl named Margaret, and without thinking about it, she kicks it away into the woods, into the forest, next to the field. Not even on the field we're playing, but 30 meters off to the side. And I say, Margaret, you weren't thinking about what you were going to do with the ball before it came to you. And she said, oh no, coach, I was thinking about it. I just hadn't reached a conclusion. Now, what was the problem here? The problem here was a pedagogical problem. I was trying to teach 11-year-old girls a kinesthetic skill, a physical skill, by lecturing to them. I was engaged in didactic instruction of 11-year-olds. I don't know how many of you have 11-year-olds in your family, but usually giving them a lecture is not effective, even for a behavioral issue, much less a physical skill. How might have I done it instead that might have been a more effective way of coaching? Well, I might have said to them, girls, bring them all together and say, girls, what are you thinking about when the ball is coming to you? Probably one of them would have said, I'm thinking about what I'm going to do with it when it gets to me. And then I could have said, why is that a good idea? So what am I? I'm engaged in Socratic teaching at this point, right? Why is that a good idea? And she would say, because if I wait to the last minute, I won't be able to do it well. And then I would turn to the other girls and say, what do you think about this? They'd say, oh yeah, that's a good idea. And then I would say to them, what kind of game or exercise could we invent that would help you practice that? And they would get together and they would invent a game. And then I'd say, okay, try it. And they'd start playing the game. And after 5 minutes or so, I'd say, oh, that looks really good. Now, how can we keep track of how well we're doing? In the medical world, we call this a metric. What's the metric of success? And they would invent one. They'd say, well, let's put 2 cones over there, and let's see how often when a ball comes to me, I can pass it to that cone accurately on the first touch. I'd say, great. So they would try it, and they'd keep count. And afterwards, I'd bring them all together, and I'd say, how'd it go? Sally, how many did you have? 5, coach. Susie, how many did you have? 2, coach. And so on. Mary, how many did you have? 7. Excellent. Why don't we try it again and see if you can do better than the first time? What am I doing there? Am I establishing a metric, a norm, a base mark against which they are performing, a benchmark. I am not establishing a benchmark, not an external benchmark. I'm establishing a personal benchmark. They're improving against themselves. Against themselves. In the medical world, people often talk about we need to do better than the benchmark, whatever that is. The benchmark is usually the average of a very bad system. There is no virtue in tying your performance to that of the average. The virtue is tying your performance to your goal and see how you do in getting better. So in our hospital, we had a problem. By the way, the blog is now called Not Running a Hospital. When I was the CEO, it was called Running a Hospital. And it's still available, and you can subscribe to it. Here's my advertisement right here. You go to the blog, just go to Google, put Paul Levy's blog. This will show up, and then you can put in your email and hit submit, and every day at 1 p.m., 1300, you will get today's blog post. So several years ago in our hospital, we recruited a new chief of medicine, a wonderful doctor named Mark Zidell, and he showed up at our hospital and he said, you know, we have too many central line infections at our hospital. You all know about central lines, catheters in the chest. And the problem, as you know, is a central line infection is a dangerous thing because you have a catheter that's connected directly to the heart. If an infection occurs, there is a mortality rate, a death rate associated with central line infections, depending which article you read, of 15, 20%. It's a bad thing. Mark arrives at our hospital and says to his staff, we have too many central line infections. And his staff responds by saying, well, no, Dr. Zidell, you know, the average, the national average is 4-point-something cases per 1,000 patient days. We're at 3.8. We're better than the benchmark. And besides, these things happen. And Dr. Zidell says, I don't give a damn what the national benchmark is. And it will no longer be the case in this hospital that these things will happen because we are going to eliminate central line infections in our hospital. Eliminate. Now this is a problem, a cognitive dissonance problem for the doctors at that moment. Their chief of medicine has said to them, the target is 0. But in their head, they believe it's statistically impossible to get to 0. Well, as you know, in this hospital, maybe you don't know, in this hospital, you have been at 0 for how long? A year? A year. It is possible to be at 0. How do you do it? It's actually quite simple, but not easy. Simple. We adopt a protocol. We figure out from the evidence what's the best way to insert and maintain a central line. We train everybody in the protocol. We keep track of the numbers. When Dr. Zidell did this, whenever there was an infection, he treated it as a sentinel event, an adverse event on which a root cause analysis was done to figure out what went wrong. And the numbers went down and down and down and down. Well, I thought this was terrific because, after all, we have a hospital. Our job is to make people better, not kill them. I wasn't from the medical field, but I knew that much about what a hospital is supposed to do. So I was really proud of these folks. They would say they were just doing their job, but it seemed to me that they were doing something very important. And so I wrote this blog post in which, and others, in which I congratulated them on their work and started to post the actual infection rate in our hospital. This is infections per 1,000 patient days. And as you'll see, every now and then it got down to 0. And I said, this is really good. I was proud of them. I made a big mistake. I forgot to ask permission to do this. I didn't know at the time that in the medical world, you never publish clinical outcomes for the world to see. It's a terrible thing to do. The world will come to an end. Academic medicine will crumble. No one will ever become a doctor anymore. Malpractice lawsuits will double and triple. Well, actually none of that happened. In our hospital, two things happened. One, people were actually happy that I was proud of them. They felt good about themselves, just like my little 11-year-old girls on the football field. The coach said, "Good job," and they said, "Thank you, coach. I feel good." The second thing that happened was people knew that our numbers were going to be posted for the world to see, so they tried even harder to do a better job. Now, this was not a matter of people in the community looking at these numbers and the doctors in our hospital worried about what the public was going to say. Nobody in the public was looking at these numbers, or if they did, they had no idea what they meant. I mean, what's a central line? What's a central line infection? What's a rate of 3.6 per 1,000 patients? Who knows what that means? No, what was happening is the existence of these numbers in a public forum was causing our own staff to hold themselves accountable to the clinical standard that they had adopted. Transparency is not about competition among hospitals. It's about holding yourself accountable to the standard you say you believe in. And that's what we started to do. We then did it for ventilator-associated pneumonia. I don't have to go through all that. And then, a few months later, our board of directors, our supervisory board, this is not the management board, our supervisory board, these are people from the community who serve as volunteers supervising the hospital, decided that the hospital as a whole should have a goal of eliminating preventable harm over a 4-year period. And that every quarter on our corporate website, not the intranet site, but the internet website, we would publish how many cases of harm we had and what category. Central line infections, surgical site infections, and so on. This was a very brave thing for a lay board to do. These are established people in the business community, and they were putting themselves at risk in terms of reputation and the reputation of our hospital by saying that we believe the only way to succeed as an institution is to be public about where we are not succeeding. The only way to improve is to admit where you are failing. And they felt that the public would trust them enough, in fact, would trust them even more if this kind of information were made public. So we did this every quarter. Now, we then turned to the issue, if we're interested in pedagogy and learning a new thing, we've talked about the value of transparency. Now let's talk about the value of mistakes. This is a serious problem for people in the medical profession, for doctors, because doctors are actually taught in medical school and in their training that they should not make mistakes. I know of no other profession in the world where people are taught, thou shalt not make a mistake. In most other professions in the world, you're taught, try not to make mistakes, but if you do, learn from them. Doctors are actually taught, don't make mistakes. This story is about Tova. You see her here at age 14. I had lunch with Tova last year. She was 28, and she said to me, do you remember that play I made in a tournament in Connecticut when I was 14? She's 28. She's asking me this question. I say, well, of course I remember that play. I remember every play. And I said, it was a great play, a great defensive play. You were the sweeper, the last player back. Someone took a shot at our goal. The goalkeeper parried the ball out into the field, just swatted it out into the field. The other team got possession of the ball, took a shot right at the goal, and Tova, you stood up in front of the goal, and with your chest, you stopped the ball and cleared it away. It was a great defensive play. She says, I don't remember that one. I said, well, which one did you remember? She said, I remember the one where I was the last defender back, and a ball comes flying through the air towards the goal, and I jumped up to head it out, and instead of heading it out, I deflected it into our net for the winning goal of the game and the entire tournament. I said, I don't remember that. And she said, I was devastated. I was sitting on the grass after the game crying and crying because I felt I had lost the game for our team. And you came up to me as coach and you said, Tova, don't worry about it. You're a great defender. I am? Sure, only the best defenders go out after every single ball, trying really hard with all their energy to clear the ball. Every now and then, the ball deflects off their head or their foot, and it scores. Don't worry about it. You're a great defender. She brushed herself off, walked away with her head up high, smiling, saying to herself, I am a great defender. 14 years earlier, and she remembered the story. 2 lessons from this. 1, you never know when a kind word to someone who's made a mistake will make a big difference in their life. Tova now uses the lessons from that season, 14 years ago, 15 years ago, in her workplace. When a colleague makes a mistake, instead of blaming them or criticizing them, she says to that person, you must feel terrible about that mistake. What can we do? What can I do to help? The second lesson, of course, is that every mistake brings a lesson and an improvement, particularly in the complicated world of hospitals, where most mistakes could happen to anybody. When a doctor or a nurse makes a mistake, it's usually not a mistake of commission where they intentionally do it. After all, it's a mistake. It's not, they didn't plan to make the mistake. It happens. But it could usually happen to anybody. I want to tell you a story from our hospital. One day, a woman who was having orthopedic surgery on her ankle woke up and looked down at her leg and said, why is the bandage on my right leg instead of my left leg? It was at that moment that her surgeon realized he had operated on the wrong leg. There is a technical term for this in the medical profession. The technical term is not good. Now, you can, those of you who are doctors or nurses in the room can imagine how that doctor felt at that moment. He was devastated. He felt terribly. Why? He had taken an oath to do no harm, and he had harmed a patient. What had happened? By the way, the patient wasn't pleased either, but that's obviously. But I'll tell you, at that one moment, it would be hard to distinguish who was more upset. They were both upset in different ways, obviously for different reasons. What had happened? Well, that surgeon had failed to do a timeout before the procedure. A timeout, before a surgery is, do we have the right patient? Do we know what we're doing with this patient? Do we have the correct body part? And so on. He had failed to do that. One of my board members, one of the supervisory board members said to me, what are you going to do to punish that doctor? And I said, nothing. He said, well, he violated one of our procedures. Aren't you going to punish him? I said, there's no punishment I could give that is worse than what he already feels. And one of our senior doctors also said, look, if we're trying to establish a culture in our organization in which people feel comfortable admitting their mistakes and their near mistakes, if we start to punish people who admit those mistakes, we will never hear about them. And therefore, we will not improve as an organization going forward. Now, there were a lot of reasons, it turns out, for that problem in the operating room that day. I'm not going to go through all of them. But an interesting aspect of this case that goes to the underlying systemic problems in hospitals is that the correct limb was marked. And it was draped. So why didn't the doctor look for the mark? To understand this, we have to understand the kind of cognitive errors that occur in hospitals. There's a phenomenon known as normalization of deviance. What's this about? The best example of normalization of deviance occurred with the Space Shuttle Columbia. Some of you may remember that it burned up coming into the atmosphere because the ceramic tiles on the bottom of the wings that protect the shuttle from the heat of re-entry had been broken off during the launch by a piece of foam that had broken off the booster rocket as the spaceship took off. It was a terrible thing. It turns out that was not the first time a piece of foam had broken off the booster rocket when the space shuttle took off. The first time it happened, the NASA engineers said, gee, that foam isn't supposed to break off. Wonder why that's happening. Well, didn't seem to do any harm. It's not supposed to happen. We can't really figure it out. Well, don't know. The second time, the rocket takes off, foam goes breaking off from the booster rocket, same thing. Oh, there's that foam again. Yeah, that happened the last time. Oh, well. The third time, they discovered that a piece of foam this big, traveling 150 miles an hour, 100 kilometers, 100 kilometers? No. I'm doing the math backwards, whatever it is. 150 kilometers an hour has the momentum of a block of cement, a cement block. And when it hits a ceramic tile, it breaks it. Normalization of deviance occurs when the substandard becomes the standard, out of habit. Nothing went wrong the first time, nothing went wrong the second time, nothing went wrong. Oh, something did go wrong the third time. Back to our operating room. In the pre-op area of our operating room, where people's bodies were marked with indelible markers to show which body part, the indelible markers had been in short supply for several months. So doctors had gotten used to using ballpoint pens to mark body parts. There's a problem with that. And the problem is, if you use a ballpoint pen and wipe it with betadine, the mark disappears. Surgeons had gotten used to the idea that they might not see the mark on the right body part because of this normalization of deviance. Whose fault is that? Should we punish the surgeon for that? Should we punish the 400 people who had worked in the pre-op area and no one had mentioned this problem before? Should we punish some supply clerk in the basement of the hospital who had neglected to put up the right number of markers on the floor? Whose fault is it? Well, as in most cases in hospitals, it's nobody's fault and it's everybody's fault. We like to talk about the holes in the Swiss cheese or whatever kind of cheese you like, lining up. A series of things line up and things go wrong. So what do we do to solve this problem? What do we do to solve this problem? Well, for this, we have to rely on our superstars in our organization. I'm going to suggest to you that there are people in every organization who everybody knows are the superstars. They're the best players. But that there are hundreds and maybe thousands of other people in the organization who have the potential to be superstars if we give them the opportunity. So this is, in the middle here, this is Brooke. Brooke was the best player on our team. She could do anything with the ball, especially she could dribble the ball. She was spectacular. But she understood that the strategy of our team was not for each player to get the ball and try to dribble it up the field. The strategy of the team was get the ball, touch it a couple times, pass, get open, and so on, and that's the way we would score. This particular game, we were playing a team that was playing a very defensive game. They weren't as good a team as we were, so they knew they had to defend. So all of their players were in front of the goal. So we'd get down the field, try to score, and we'd hit one of their players. We could never get through to score. Halftime comes, it's 0-0. I say to Brooke in front of all the other girls, Brooke, you're a great dribbler. Usually I want you to pass the ball to other players, but this time, when you get the ball, next time you get it, just walk it into the goal. She says, what do you mean? I said, well, just dribble through all those other players and score. She says, okay, coach, here's her chance. Right? She gets the ball at midfield, and dribbles through 7 players and just scores like that. So high fives from all her teammates, everybody was happy. If Brooke had played that way all the time, she would have been viewed as selfish. But because her play that day was part of the team strategy, and everybody knew that, everybody appreciated her. So lesson number 1 is where we have superstars in the organization, and you have plenty of them here, you have world-famous people doing what they do, it's fine to let them excel, but as long as it's part of the overall strategy. Part number 2 is the more important lesson. Everybody can be a superstar. This woman is Gloria Martinez. Gloria in our hospital was a transporter. Her job was pushing beds and delivering specimens from the various departments to the pathology laboratory. One day, Gloria noticed that specimens from the GI department, which were mainly polyps from people's colon that had been removed during colonoscopies, were sometimes getting misplaced on the way to the laboratory and wouldn't get there. As you know, those polyps are actually very important indicators of cancerous or precancerous conditions. If someone has precancerous polyps, it means that you want to do a colonoscopy more often. And in fact, today, if we do this correctly, we can virtually eliminate colon cancer. But if a polyp is removed and it's precancerous and it never gets to the laboratory and it's never studied, probably what that will happen is the doctor will say to the patient, come back in 10 years instead of next year. So Gloria noticed this problem and she called out this problem. She mentioned it to her supervisor. Who said to her in a pleasant way, thank you so much for mentioning this. This is important. We're going to get on this. We're going to fix this problem. And then he called together people and they redesigned the way in which specimens were collected in our hospital. The fact that Gloria mentioned this saved some lives. Oh, we don't know how many, but certainly saved some lives over the coming years. Now, what usually happens in a hospital when a person working on the front lines, a transporter, a respiratory therapist, a food service worker, says something to his or her supervisor? I noticed this problem. Usually the answer is, I'm sorry, can you tell me about it later? I'm very busy. I have to go to a budget meeting. I'm sure that never happens here. But we had engaged in our hospital in a cultural transformation that said to people that they were empowered, entitled, and indeed expected, regardless of their job in the hospital, to call out problems when they saw them. We didn't expect them to solve the problems, but we expected them to mention the problems. Gloria, you see Gloria here. She was 22, 23 years old, a recent immigrant to the United States, Spanish-speaking, not particularly good English, high school educated, no college. Yet she knew enough that it was part of her job to deliver the message when something went wrong. Now, around this time, our supervisory board created what they called a Caller Outer of the Month award. This was an award that was given to somebody on the front line who mentioned a problem to their supervisor. Not solved a problem, but mentioned a problem to their supervisor, which was then acted upon. Gloria got the first award, the first Caller Outer of the Month award. But you can imagine she was a bit intimidated to get that award. She comes to the meeting of the supervisors. They're all dressed up in their suits and fancy dresses. These are accomplished business people, well-educated, prominent people. And Gloria, little Gloria, gets this award. The award, by the way, was a letter from me and 2 tickets to the Boston Red Sox. That's a local baseball team. She says the following. to the board in these words: "Thank you so much for this award, which I accept on behalf of all of the transporters who work here, who believe that our job is to deliver the kind of care to patients that we would want for members of our own family." Not bad. Not bad. What has Gloria done? First of all, I had board members crying when she said this. Why? Because she has codified the purpose of our hospital, which is the same purpose you have here: to take care of the community, people in the community, the way you would want to be taken care of and you would want for members of your own family. And our board was very touched by this, because that's why they served on our board, to help deliver that kind of care. And here's someone at the very bottom of the organization, one of the lowest paid people, who has internalized this message and believes it as strongly as they do, but has operationalized it also, has made it part of her life to make it happen. And that her manager, her supervisor, understood that his job was to help her do that. This turns management on its head. We can have transparency. We can have a proper consideration of mistakes and errors as part of teaching a new way of doing business. But the final step in this is that the leaders of the organization, in my case, the coach of the football team, or the CEO of the hospital, or a department head, a clinical department head, or a manager, instead of having the normal organization chart with the CEO and the top managers at the top of a triangle, we turn it over. Instead of having thousands of people working for us, we are working for them. There's a man who describes this as servant leadership. The idea is that if you're lucky enough and privileged enough to be the leader of an organization or a group of people, your job is not to do their job. Your job isn't even to hold them accountable. Your job is to give them the tools that let them accomplish what they want to accomplish in the first place. We in the hospital world are really lucky that we work with extremely well-intentioned people, thoughtful people who want to alleviate human suffering. But it's not only the doctors and nurses who do that. It's everybody in the organization. And our job as leaders, as coaches, as teachers, is to be the servants to that group, so that when a resident raises an issue to a senior doctor, that doctor's job is to say, "Thank you for asking that question. Thank you for noticing that problem." When a food service worker, when someone delivering food to a patient room notices an unsafe condition and mentions it to the nurse manager or the administrator on the floor, it's the job of that manager to say to that person, "Thank you so much for mentioning that. We're going to solve that problem." And the reason for that is that no leadership group, no matter how good they are, can design a high-quality, effective, efficient healthcare institution from the top. You know, the Russians tried that with the Politburo. They tried to design a whole economy from the Kremlin. You can't do it. The people who can design the economy and who can help design a patient care delivery system in a hospital the best way are the people who every day are delivering the service to those patients, if we empower them to do that. So our job as leaders is to do that, to understand that our job is not to lecture at Margaret and her colleagues, but to use her experience and that of her colleagues to help them train themselves. It's not to blame Tova for getting the ball into the net. It's to explain to her, "Well, Tova, mistakes happen. Let's see what we can learn from that." It's to find people like Gloria Martinez and recognize them when they make a contribution to the organization. Now, I know here in the Netherlands, especially this part of the Netherlands, people are modest about their work. They don't deal well with praise. I've seen that, both here and Den Bosch. They don't deal well with praise. They just say, well, it's my job. I want to do a good job. It's my job. What I'd like to suggest to you is that there are people in the organization for whom a little praise and telling their stories of success are an important part of the solution. Because when other people see that they have succeeded in helping to improve the organization, it might prompt them also to make suggestions for improvement. And it creates a cultural imperative that the whole organization participates in. So I haven't talked much about medicine here per se, clinical medicine, decision making, where you cut when a body is being operated on, how you control infections and the like. You as doctors and nurses know how to do that. But I am suggesting that for you as leaders and for other leaders in the organization, your job as coach is a bit different. Your job as coach is to help an organization adopt a culture that creates a learning organization, that creates an organization that wants to get better at getting better, that is not satisfied with a benchmark based on some national average, that's only satisfied when it's knowing that its job is never complete, that its job is to go forward every day and get better at getting better. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paul, for this excellent lecture.
Thank you.
You're a brilliant teacher because we have learned.
Oh, thank you.
Okay. There's room left for some questions. Who wants to ask a question to Paul?
Yes. Do you have any experiences with other hospitals on your message?
The question is, are there experiences from other hospitals? And yes, they fall into two categories. The ones that are doing what I'm saying and the ones that don't. And first, let me talk about the ones that do this. There are several that have been incredibly successful in improving the quality of patient care, as measured by infections, wrong site surgeries, all those kinds of things. And also discovering that as you improve the quality of care, financial results tend to get better. Now, why is that? It's because the kind of system I've discussed here, the kinds of approach I've discussed here, and quality improvement in general, reduces the amount of waste in hospitals. We discovered in our hospital that this is the number of cases of ventilator-associated pneumonia that we avoided by improving the protocols in our ICUs. This plus the central line program reduced the length of stay in our ICUs by 20%, from 5 days to 4 days. Around this time, and what did that do? That created capacity. Around this time, we had been planning to build out a new ICU because we were crowded. By reducing the length of stay, we eliminated the need to build out a new ICU, saving millions of dollars in construction costs and staff and so on. So if you go around the world and you go to the hospitals that have done this kind of thing, they find that there's a virtuous relationship between quality and safety improvement, transparency, and financial results.
I'm usually on the receiving end of care. I'm a patient. So I've asked my doctor several times about processes in the hospital, which I was not happy with. I said, why can't we do this? It will make me feel better. It will make you feel better. And he said, yeah, you're totally right. I so agree with you. Go to the complaints committee, and then nothing happens.
Right, right.
So you've got two unhappy people there, and I bet there are much more. How do you change an attitude? Where do you start?
You start in a lot of different ways. In our hospital, our secret weapon number 2 was the patients and the families. So how do we engage patients in helping to improve the quality of care in hospitals? Ideally, we'd want to do it the same way we engage the frontline staff, which is to say when a patient is in the hospital or with a doctor and makes a suggestion, it would be really nice to say, thank you so much, we're going to do that, or I'm going to take that under advisement or whatever. It seems to me there are 2 ways to do that right now. One is a formal way, which is to establish advisory bodies in the hospital, patient, family, doctor groups and nurses that get together regularly to evaluate what's going on in different parts of the hospital and try to improve it. We established those in our intensive care units, for example. We had an advisory group that did that made a number of suggestions to our doctors and nurses that they hadn't thought about before, and when they thought about them, they said, oh, those are good, we should do that. That's one way. The other way, in the more day-to-day way, and this is where Lucian and his folks are working on a number of projects, is to make it easier for the communication to occur. Everybody's really busy. You're busy as a patient, your doctor's busy. Let's say you're being treated by your GP, but you have some condition that requires one or more specialists also to be involved. Well, one of the biggest problems in academic medical centers is people, not here I'm sure, people in different departments sometimes don't talk to each other. You've never seen that here, I know, but in the United States, at our place, you know, I'd be seen by a doctor and they'd say, well, go talk to the cardiologist. I go to the cardiologist. What are you here for? Well, my doctor came and told me to see you. Okay, I'm seen by the cardiologist. You look fine. And it's over, and they never talk to each other again. Well, wouldn't it be great if using social media, we could have a conversation at a convenient time for 3 or 4 of us to actually talk to the patient, talk to 2 or 3 doctors, take 5 or 10 minutes for something that otherwise would take you 3 hours or more, coming to the hospital, waiting, seeing one doctor, going home, come back for another time, and so on. So I think we're going to be helped out by those technological advances.
Okay, Paul. Unfortunately, it's time to stop.
Thank you.
6 o'clock. Thank you very much. We have learned many lessons from hospitals, about safety, about soccer, and that's very special in a country with more than 16 million bonds coaches.
Exactly.
Thank you very much for this talk.
Thank
Paul
you for
Levy.
having me.
Dames en heren, de volgende keer zal de Grand Round weer door een interne spreker worden verzorgd. En we zijn ontzettend blij dat Didi Braat bereid is om de volgende Grand Round te houden. Het is wel even spannend of het nou in januari of in december nog zal gaan gebeuren, maar dat hoort u binnenkort van ons. Een goede avond nog.